Kia ora koutou. As Nicole said, I'm Anna, and by day I am a water engineer, but tonight I will be talking about the history of the pregnancy test. So in this presentation, I'm going to be taking us through the history and development of the science behind pregnancy testing, all the way from ancient Egypt through the European Middle Ages and into scientific developments through the 20th century to present day. So starting all the way back in ancient Egypt, the very first pregnancy test discovered was written down on a piece of papyrus. And this test involved taking a bundle of wheat and a bundle of barley. And the woman who would suspect that she was pregnant would urinate on both of these bushels of grains and then see if it would germinate faster than the grains that would be germinated with water or with non-pregnant urine. So if it germinated within a week, that would say that you're pregnant. And not only was this a test to determine if you'd be pregnant or not, history also says that it was also could be a little sex reveal test. So if the wheat sprouted first, it could be a female baby, and then if the barley sprouted first, then it would be a male. This test was actually brought a little to modern science in the 1960s. This was put to the test, and it actually had a 70% accuracy rate. I guess a 50% accuracy rate would be like, nothing. But so it's something. So there's something happening here. And I do want to clarify, in this presentation, I'm going to be using the word women, but I do want it to be inclusive. I'm really talking about any human who has reproductive organs for female, but I'll be using the term women throughout the presentation. So bringing to the European Middle Ages, here we have a painting, and this was done by a Dutch artist in the 1600s, and some of you might actually recognize this painting. This is called The Physician, and it was recently on display in the Christchurch Art Gallery. So we'll zoom in here. This is the physician. So he is looking at a vial of urine, and behind him you can see this woman, the possibly pregnant and definitely dehydrated woman here. So what he is looking for is just the difference in color, I guess. So I found some text that kind of described what he'd be looking for. So he's looking for a clear, pale lemon color, leaning towards off-white and having a cloud on its surface. So I don't know. I would guess that she's not pregnant from this painting, but don't know how that one turned out. So as I was doing some research, I came across a whole list of kind of DIY at-home pregnancy tests. So this all involved pee. So urinating, mixing urine with different things, seemingly just whatever you found in your cupboard. So some vinegar, soap, white wine, bleach, dandelions, sugar, and baking soda. All of these tests had kind of slightly different variations. Your pee would either fizz or develop clouds or smell weird. But there was one that was interesting. So this is a different type. This didn't involve urine. It actually involved drawing a bath and then putting mustard powder in the bath. And then the suspecting woman would bathe in it, and then the mustard apparently would induce menstruation. So if you got your period the next day, then you were not pregnant. So it seems a little obvious, but this was a test that was performed. So at your own risk, try this one, I guess. So I'm going to take a quick detour from the history lesson into high school biology class. So I want to just go over the basics of the female reproductive system. As everyone knows, a typical menstrual cycle is 28 days, and in pregnancy, the very first day of pregnancy, day 1 out of a 40-week pregnancy, is counted of the first day of the last period that you had. So ovulation occurs on average around day 14 of this. So you'd be 14 days into your pregnancy before you would even ovulate or produce an egg. And once ovulation occurs, an egg is released from the ovary and gets taken up into the fallopian tube. And within 12 to 24 hours, this egg would need to be fertilized, or else it would just die and be reabsorbed by the body. But in the case that the egg was fertilized, it would continue its journey, travel through the fallopian tube, and enter the uterus. And something very important happens on day 8 to 9-ish. This egg is now a blastocyst, and it implants into the wall of the uterus. And this is very important because this is when the cells of the placenta begin to form. And the cells of the placenta are the cells that begin to release something called the pregnancy hormone. And this is also known as human chorionic gonadotropin, I think. So, HCG, as I will be saying from now on. Yes, this is the pregnancy hormone that is detected in modern-day pregnancy tests, and this is what that special ingredient in the urine was that caused all sorts of random cloudy or fizzy reactions in the other tests. So this hormone, from on the bottom is gestational age, so that's weeks of pregnancy. So there's a wide range of this concentration of HCG in early pregnancy. You can have a very high range or low. So the pink line that I've put on this graph here is the approximate detection level of a modern at-home pregnancy test. So this just says that pregnancy is detectable with that anywhere from around 4 to 6 weeks after, after the day of the last period. And HCG, it increases very rapidly in early pregnancy, and this is very well correlated to this nausea and vomiting experienced in the first trimester for many pregnant people. And as the second trimester comes, this typically subsides as HCG levels decrease. This is a timeline I made just to say the detectable levels of HCG occur approximately on day 28, so approximately the day where you'd expect your period to get a missed period would be when you would detect, but for some people, it can be a lot later. It could be 6, 7 weeks beyond that. Okay, so why are pregnancy tests needed? So historically, pregnancy testing was very expensive, and it was exclusively used by people that had an urgent medical need to know if they were pregnant. It kind of went beyond curiosity. You could typically just wait 9 months, see what happens. But for example, if someone had an abdominal tumor and the doctor was trying to diagnose that, they would want to make sure that pregnancy wasn't the cause of that or the cause of lots of other symptoms. So it was kind of figuring out what's not happening to better diagnose and treat patients. So now we're entering into the scientific developments of the 20th century. So in the 1920s, the first lab-based accurate pregnancy test was developed. This was called the Asheim, sorry about that pronunciation, and Zondek test, the AZ test. So this was a pregnancy test that involved the use of 5 juvenile female mice or rats, could be the original rat test. And these mice were injected with urine 3 times a day for 5 days. So after they're injected with urine for 5 days straight, they get killed and dissected. So all 5 of them are dissected, and what the researcher, the lab technician, would be looking for would be this inflammation of the uterine horns, and then these are the ovaries. And the HCG would cause the ovaries of these juvenile mice to undergo a transformation, and the eggs would swell so bad that they would kind of explode and be bloody. And so really bad time for the mouse, really horrible, it get killed either way. So this test, the first, but is very accurate, upwards of 95% accurate for this test. It was slightly improved, I guess I'll say, in the 1930s because we started using rabbits instead. So the rabbits, it's very similar, inject the rabbits with urine, see what happens, and then dissect them after 5 days. Rabbits were slightly more docile, so that's why I said improved, but that's called the Friedman test. So also in the 1930s, we have another test being developed by this doctor from the UK with an absolute banger of a name. I love this. Lancelot Hogbin. I just love that name. So great. So he was a young doctor, and by this time, hormones had been discovered. They hadn't all been exactly identified, but they knew something was going on and knew that this was driving biological processes. So Dr. Hogbin went down to South Africa to study hormones, and he found that in a lot of South African labs, instead of using rats and mice and rabbits, they used this creature called the Xenopus laevis, the African clawed frog. So this was easy to grow or easy to keep in labs. They lived for up to 20 years. And he was running experiments on the pituitary glands of oxen. So he would take extracts from pituitary glands, inject it into this frog. And he had a realization one day. His discovery was that when he had female frogs injected with the pituitary gland extracts, they would release eggs. Within 5 hours, their whole tank would be full of eggs. And he's like, something's happening here. And he had this realization. He's like, well, the higher hormone level in the urine, this could be a living pregnancy test. It could be reusable. You wouldn't have to kill 5 mice every time. So he developed the ChCh test. So he would inject the frogs with urine, and he took lots of these frogs, brought them back to the UK, started a lab there, and this was the major pregnancy testing for about 2 decades. So the ChCh pregnancy test. The frogs would live in their little vials, and then you can see the eggs here being released within about 5 to 12 hours. And this test was extremely accurate, 99% accuracy for this pregnancy test. So then, as I said, multiple decades of this was just the way to know. These tests were very expensive, though, reserved for people that had medical issues or could pay, and that it really didn't have, was always through physicians, and that didn't have the power in the hands of the people actually wanting to know this personal information. So the first kind of at-home pregnancy test was kind of developed. So this test was called Primodose. And this is not a urine-based test. This is a test that's similar to what I was mentioning before with the bathtub full of mustard option. So essentially, you would take 2 tablets of Primodose, and as you can see, their main selling point is that it's not a frog, I guess. So, and you take the 2 tablets, and it would induce menstruation, and then you would know earlier if you were pregnant or not. This was in the only in the market in the UK during the 60s. And sadly, a lot of the women who did take these pregnancy tests, the rates of stillbirth and birth defects was very high. So it was lots of lawsuits happened, taken out of the market, not the good method to use. And the other downside, when these new development tests, pregnancy tests began to be developed, all of these unemployed frogs were just released into the wild. And it was just like all over the world. South in Africa, well, I guess they're native there, but South America, Europe, there's just colonies of these South African frogs, still to today. So entering into, still in the 1960s, the development of antibody-based testing occurred. So finally, we don't have to use mice, we don't have to use bunnies, don't have to use frogs, but we still use sheep's blood at this point. So animals didn't quite get off the hook just yet. So the initial, still lab-based pregnancy test, so this is not an at-home test at this point, but they take sheep's blood, coat it in HCG, and then mix it with HCG antibodies, which had been discovered at this point. So this mixture was then mixed with urine, whether it had HCG or not, would produce 2 different results. One of the results would have the HCG antibodies would sorb to the blood cells that were coated in HCG, and then the other result would be the HCG antibodies would cling to the HCG in situ in the urine. So this was a test done in the lab, still had to be ordered by doctors and performed by professionals, until in 1965, a 26-year-old graphic designer who was working for a pharmaceutical company in New Jersey. Her name was Margaret Crane, and she worked developing packaging for lipsticks and mascara and other cosmetic products. And she was in the lab one day and saw that they were doing these pregnancy tests in the lab and realized, it's not that hard. They're just basically mixing 2 things together and waiting 2 hours. So she had the idea. So she brought it up to her bosses, and she said, I can design a package to make this pregnancy test be at home. It would be a huge market. Women would definitely want this. It would be a huge seller. And the reaction was, no, I don't think they could do it. It seems too hard. I don't think it'd be a good market. But she kept pushing through, and she has the first patent for an at-home pregnancy test. So what Margaret invented was called the predictor. So she took the prototype for a paperclip box and developed it into this little clear stand with, it held the vial. So you mixed the urine with the sheep's blood, and it stood on this little vial hanger here. And then there's a mirror at the bottom. And then after 2 hours, if the pregnancy test was positive, then this circle would develop at the bottom of that test tube. And then the mirror let you not touch it and be able to observe the result. It could reflect back up at you that way. So this was a huge invention. So this was released into the Canadian market in 1971, and then very shortly after all through Europe, and then in 1976 into the US market. So here's some just awesome 70s advertisements I'm just gonna run through. I just loved these, so enjoy. There's just like, loved the aesthetic here, how everyone's so happy either way, love it, love that. So this is the predictor, and then competitors started coming into the market too. This is the EPT test. Still the same result, that either you get a ring or not, and these took 2 hours, but you could do it in the privacy of your home. They were very affordable. Really started revolutionizing the information that women were allowed to have, about their own bodies and how soon that could be obtained. A couple other competitors here, the ACU test and the Answer test. So with all of this information about early pregnancy, started to raise some very important questions. Should you drink if you're pregnant? So things like this started to get an ad campaign really addressing early maternal health. So with knowledge comes power here. So questions like drinking and quit smoking, you're breathing for 2, with amazing hair, best part. So this just empowered women to take control and make decisions about their body and change lifestyle habits, and lots of empowerment came along with this. It was during the 1970s, so in tandem with the sexual revolution, just kind of all happening together. So moving to present day, the pregnancy test that we all think of when you think of that, the lateral flow test. So this is the pee on a stick test, we all know. So as Nicole mentioned, I had recent experience with the lateral flow test. I did get a positive COVID test about a month and a half ago. So this, as we know, you put your bodily fluid here, and then it travels through the special paper, or I don't actually know what it is, like cotton or something, and then it clings to dye, is stuck to the antibodies, and then the antibodies flow through the test and then either trigger the control line, test line, and control line. I won't get too much into the science behind that because the history is more fun. So these lateral flow tests became very affordable. Even IKEA had a print ad where they put a lateral flow test at the bottom of the ad. And if you peed on the test and it was positive, you got a discount code for a crib. Yeah. So the pregnancy test, as we know today, is the first released into the market in 1988 by the company Clear Blue. So this, I just really loved this. It's great. Happy either way. Those are my sources, and thank you.
Everyone loves the pictures. So we'll take about 3 questions now, if anyone has them.
Yes. She was totally shafted by the pharmaceutical company. So she holds a license in her name, but the profits all went to her company. Yeah, I listened to a podcast that she was talking, but she's still alive today. She did a podcast, and she was just like, I didn't really make any money off of it. It's too bad. Yeah. Yes?
When you mentioned in the UK the 60s, the primo box, do you know what it contained that caused that?
I do not know. So, yeah, I'm not sure of the exact chemical that would induce menstruation. That's a great question. Yeah, I'm not sure. Yes?
Do you know how accurate this modern pregnancy test is? Like, can you screw it up? My friends said her sister took 8 of them. Are you sure?
Well,
all 8 were positive.
Well, I think there's just such a wide range of HCG levels. Like, I was looking at the graph before, and the low levels, like, barely got above the detectable line. So I would think that maybe some people could not even register as pregnant if their HCG level.
That level. But don't any, like, if your urine has enough, it should always rest.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't need to take 8 after the first one was positive.
Oh, yeah, I think if you get 1 positive one, 7 more are not required. Yeah. I would guess, yeah. Any other questions? Cool. Thank you, guys.